Behind the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer continues to build. Hundreds of thousands of people have watched the series, and more than 200,000 people from coast to coast signed online petitions calling for Steven Avery's release. Avery was convicted in 2007 for the murder of Teresa Halbach and was sentenced to life in prison. New at 5, Michelle Clemens examines why this series continues to catch the attention of so many.
It's a case that first made headlines about 10 years ago.
The disappearance of Teresa Halbach remains a mystery.
But after Netflix released a 10-part series on Steven Avery's case last month, it's gotten a whole new following.
One of the reasons it's so popular is that it came around at the right time. Recently in the media, there's kind of been a resurrection of the true crime genre.
The trailer alone has gotten more than 1.1 million views on YouTube.
I think that it's the kind of narrative that grabs people in one way or another. It does feel like it could sort of happen anywhere.
It has people and celebrities like Alec Baldwin watching and sharing their opinions. Hundreds of thousands of people around the country have watched the Making a Murderer series, and instead of just sitting there, they're taking to the web.
There are people, putting together petitions for his release.
This petition on change.org has nearly 200,000 signatures. Another through the White House is just short of its 100,000 signature threshold.
If a petition reaches that threshold, then the President of the United States has to have somebody in the federal government, somebody in his cabinet, somebody that's under his employ to actually respond to this.
We asked the Wisconsin Attorney General's office if there were any changes that could be made as an outcome of these petitions, and we're told the President of the United States cannot pardon someone convicted in a state case.
Rarely does somebody who works for the federal government say, you know what, you're absolutely right, let's change this immediately.
In the meantime, people are continuing to watch and talk about it. Michelle Clemens, Action 2 News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. For the first time since the release of Making a Murderer on Netflix, we're hearing from those closest to Steven Avery. The 10-part series documents Avery's wrongful conviction and exoneration, followed by his conviction for the 2005 murder of Teresa Halbach. In tonight's top story, Emily Matesic sat down with Avery's girlfriend, who believes a new attorney is the key to reopening the case.
To the fact that he's actually at the table and can talk with us instead of behind glass.
Sandy Greenman, as portrayed in Making a Murderer, is Steven Avery's girlfriend. She says at the urging of her now late husband, she started writing letters to Avery when he was being held in the Calumet County Jail prior to his 2007 trial.
My husband said, I think you should go see him. My husband was ill and he couldn't do it. He said, I think you should start writing to him and go see him. He said he needs support. And that's how this all started, with me going to see him and supporting him.
And almost a decade later, she still supports Avery and is blown away by the attention his case has received.
I had no idea it would be this big of a firestorm.
She says since the series release, Steven Avery has received hundreds of letters of support and even some gifts.
He's very happy with the letters that he's getting, the support, the love that they show him, that they're behind him.
Greenman, like those writing to Avery, believe he's innocent. So much so that she spent the past several years trying to find him a post-conviction attorney. It's work that appears to have paid off, as Greenman said the woman she was trying to get to represent Avery is ready to sign on.
She is terrific in post-conviction, the best in the country. And that's why I've been trying to get her for 4 years, and almost 4, just under 4. And in fact, I've stalked her.
According to Greenman, the unnamed attorney wants to retest the blood found in Halbach's vehicle against the test tube of Avery's blood that was in the Manitowoc County Clerk of Court's office. But she realizes even after more than 10 years, it's probably going to take additional evidence to reopen the case.
I think maybe the only way that this is going to happen is if somebody comes forward. And that's something I've been praying for, that someone that knows something about the real killer will come forward.
In Neenah, Emily Matesic, Action 2 News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. Cami is off this evening. Governor Scott Walker is using Twitter to advise viewers of the Netflix series Making a Murderer to read up on the case before jumping to any conclusions.
The governor's tweet this morning follows his interview with Action 2 News, where he calls the hit series one-sided, saying it's not a real documentary and he has no plans to pardon Steven Avery. Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey are serving life sentences for their conviction in the murder of freelance photographer Teresa Halbach in 2005. 2005. At the time of Avery's arrest, he had a pending $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc County because he'd spent 18 years in prison for a rape he did not commit. Making a Murderer makes a case that Avery was framed for Halbach's murder as a result of that pending lawsuit. In tonight's top story, Andrea Hay is live in the newsroom with what's next for this case. Andrea.
Bill and Sarah, Stephen Avery has no pardon from the governor, has exhausted all his appeals, and no longer has the right to a state representation. But with a new team of attorneys behind him, his fight for freedom doesn't appear to be over. Stephen Avery has millions of online supporters, nearly 400,000 of whom signed a Change.org petition to get him a presidential pardon. The official White House response explains that pardons for state convictions like Avery's need to come from the state's governor, Scott Walker, who refused.
People watching a TV series calling for a pardon without having little or no knowledge of major pieces of evidence missing. It's precisely why I haven't done any pardons up until now, and I don't plan on doing any in the future.
The governor has not seen Making a Murderer, but calls it one-sided.
Documentaries tend to offer a kind of a balanced approach. It's really not a documentary, it's a TV series. This is someone who was convicted by a jury of his peers. The conviction was upheld in the Court of Appeals and in the state Supreme Court.
Governor Walker tweeted out some failed appeals Monday and advised viewers to read them before jumping to conclusions. Avery has exhausted every appeal option, but has a new team of lawyers on his side. Attorney Kathleen T. Zellner declined our request for an interview, but in a statement Monday, promises her team has new evidence, which is the one thing needed to move the case forward.
Unless they can bring evidence forward that proves otherwise, the courts are going to not act again.
Kathleen Zellner will also represent Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey. She gave us a glimpse of her future with the case by tweeting she believes that the person who deleted Teresa Halbach's voicemails had something to do with the murder and that, quote, the killer is free. Sarah.
Emily Matesic has been covering the case since November of 2005 and appeared today on the episode with Dr. Phil. She joins us now live in the studio with the details of today's discussion. Emily.
Well, Bill, today's episode of Dr. Phil was actually taped on Tuesday of this week. I appeared in studio in Los Angeles while the other guests appeared via satellite, answering questions for the first time publicly since the Netflix series Making a Murderer debuted last month. Former Manitowoc County Sheriff Kenneth Peterson told Dr. Phil he believes Stephen Avery is where he belongs, in prison for the rest of his life. Nancy Grace agreed. She and Dr. Phil debated the case passionately. He asked me more about my interactions with Avery, including a jailhouse interview I conducted with him after it was announced he would be charged with Halbach's murder. I was also asked about the accuracy of the series that some have called one-sided.
Do you think there was important evidence left out of this documentary series? You've watched it, right? You've seen all 10 episodes.
I have watched all 10 episodes. The producers were able to condense it into 10 hours. Did they include everything that was presented at trial? No, they didn't. If they did, then you would be sitting there watching the entire trial all over again. So they decided to pick and choose what they put into it.
So, Emily, what was it like being on the other side of the question?
It was different. I mean, as reporters, we're the ones that are always answering the question or asking the question. So answering them was a little different. I guess I now know the pressure of people that we do talk to. And a lot of people have been asking kind of, you know, was anything left out of the series? And people that I've talked with around here have talked about how Teresa Halbach really isn't featured in the series a lot. I mean, this is a 25-year-old woman who had her whole life ahead of her that her family and friends live without every day. So Dr. Phil didn't ask me about that, but I think coming up on Monday, he does have a little bit more about that in it.
We'll see you there.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks so much.
Emily Matesic joins us live from Waupun Correctional Institution with her exclusive interview and why Zellner is convinced that Avery should be a free man. Emily.
Bill and Cammie, Kathleen Zellner arrived here around 12:30 this afternoon. She spent more than 3 hours inside Waupun Correctional meeting with Stephen Avery. We spoke with her not only when she went into the prison, but also when she came out. She told us both she and Avery are optimistic. As Kathleen Zellner arrived at Waupun Correctional this afternoon, she exuded confidence in her ability to exonerate Stephen Avery, believing her team would be able to uncover new evidence.
Since 2007, there have been significant advances in forensic testing, and so clearly the clearest way to do this is with scientific testing, and that's what we'll be asking to do.
Part of their independent investigation was to buy a Toyota RAV4, the same make and model as the one Teresa Halbach owned. That's the vehicle which was found on the Avery salvage yard property. DNA evidence found inside of it links Stephen Avery to the case.
I want to understand the hood latch, battery cables, where the blood was supposedly found in the car. I want to examine what was not tested in the car that should have been tested, because there's a number of things in the car that would obviously have needed to be tested that weren't.
And while Zellner wouldn't specifically name anyone, she did say there are other suspects on her list of people who could have killed Teresa Halbach.
Clearly there are other people we're looking at. That's always done in a case like this.
And as Kathleen Zellner left here within the last 90 minutes or so, she did tell us that the motion that Stephen Avery filed to be released from prison on bond pending the appeal has been withdrawn now that she has taken on his case. She tells us probably within the next 30 days we could see movement in this appeals process. Reporting live in Waupun, Emily Matesic, Action 2 News.
The last few months have been an emotional roller coaster for local families who suffered the loss of a child in a brutal murder.
Well, they say the national attention on Stephen Avery following the release of the series Making a Murderer frustrates and outrages them. They believe people are forgetting Teresa Halbach and her family.
This Target 2 on assignment. Sarah Thompson sat down with some of those families, sharing a passionate plea with the community to remember the victims.
Right, they need all the support they can.
Bill and Carol Breyer and Vicki and Rick Jones belong to a small circle of families no one ever wants to join.
It's unexplainable what it feels like.
Every day you think of her.
Both families endured the pain and suffering of a murdered child. In July of 1991, the Breyers' granddaughter, Amy, was just weeks from her 3rd birthday when she was kidnapped from her bedroom in the town of Menasha by the man staying next door.
And he took the screen off the front of the trailer and took Amy out of her bed. And off he went. Back in the field is where they found her.
She'd been raped and strangled.
And it was raining. The poor little thing laid out in the rain.
Her killer is in prison for life, but Amy's murder left a void few could possibly understand.
They don't know what it's like unless they go through it.
3 years later, Bill and Carol Breyer would meet a family who would.
It'll be 22 in September, 22 years.
Rick and Vicki Jones's daughter Cora hopped on her bike at her grandma's house in Wapaka County on Labor Day 1994 and headed toward a favorite fishing spot to see a boy she liked.
And he wasn't there, and when she turned around to come back up to Grandma's is when he seen her and come down, turned around on that road, snatched her, and there we laid her bike in the middle of the road.
Her parents launched a massive search.
She was wearing a bright green neon jacket.
Hundreds more volunteers joined over the next 5 days. That's when Cora was found murdered 75 miles away. Her killer also went to prison where he died. But it was a moment in that middle of that horrifying week of searching. Vicki and Rick received comfort from the mothers of Barrett Beck and Ronnie Eichstad. Both girls had also been murdered.
It makes us feel a lot better because they know how we feel. I mean, everybody's just great here. And everybody says we don't know how you feel, but these people do. I mean, all our daughters.
Now 2 decades later, they're hoping to pass on that same support to Tom and Karen Halbach.
One mom to another, my heart goes out to her.
Teresa needed a voice somewhere, something, you know, to kind of put the family at ease.
These families feel they have to say something, hoping people shift their attention to the one quieted voice.
I hope they realize how many people are behind them. They're in their prayers.
Neither family has watched the Netflix series, nor do they intend to.
I won't watch it. Everything I've heard about it, I won't watch it.
No.
Very, very frustrating.
Yes, it is.
They say the series not only outrages them by putting so little focus on Teresa, but it brings back memories of their own loved ones.
Still comes up every day. You think about it every day.
Even after more than 20 years, you can see the pain these families still live with. After only 10, they can't begin to understand what the Halbachs may be facing.
It'd be all like reliving it all over again.
These families hope sharing their stories not only helps the Halbachs, but makes others think twice and remember the life of a young daughter, sister, and friend.
Our hearts go out to you. You're in our prayers, and stay strong.
So we're there for them.
The Breyers say they plan to reach out to Teresa's parents to see if they can offer any support, comfort, or advice to them. We reached out to the Halbachs today, who say hearing these families support them is a great comfort.